Yes, thank you for joining this Krampus coloring challenge. Krampus is a really cool Christmas baddie from Germanic and Alpine folklore. He was sort of the anti-hero to Santa Claus. He would go and punish and scare the children who had been naughty. Let's get started and color this. So I only ended up using pretty much these top 4 pencils. You can add a couple other brown colors if you want, but basically you want a bright red, a dark red, a medium brown, and then a lighter brown. I used a few of these lighter colors just to blend in the background of the pencils, but I mostly kept it to the top 4. And then I had some metallic watercolors there, which were totally optional. You could also use metallic gel pens or anything, glitter, anything you like to add a little bit of holiday sparkle. So my technique here, I'm starting with an ivory pencil, but this could be your lightest brown with just the lightest touch you can do around the character. So what I'm going for on the background of this piece is lighter around him and then just a very subtle darkening around the corners of it. So take your lightest brown pencil, maybe even a tan or something like that, and just very, with the lightest touch you can kind of see I'm using the side of the pencil, just start going around your Krampus. And I kind of switched to that warm gray there, but again, this could be a beige or a tan, or if you're coming up with your own color scheme, it could be whatever you want at this point. But if you're following along, just get your lightest brown and start blocking in very, light layering. And then next, I'll get a darker pencil and I'll start doing in the corners. So this is sort of a medium. This is a little more yellowish brown, which kind of adds a nice age to look to it. So I'm just starting in the corners, and I'm going to go over this with another even darker pencil. But right now I'm just starting to blend in where I want the darker spots to be. So that's the corners, the edges, and it'll just sort of give it a nice weathered look there. And I'm leaving the space around the Krampus with the very, light touch of the lighter pencil. And here I'm not being too even. You can see I'm sort of adding a little bit of blotchy texture to this medium brown, looking at it from a distance, and just sort of blocking in that first dark corner, sort of the vignette. And of course, how dark you want to go here is totally up to you. I like a little bit more shading, a little bit more contrast. So I tend to darken it up and add a lot of shadowy parts. But this is still a really light touch. You don't have to press very hard. You want to keep it pretty light. Then here I switched to my darkest brown, and I'm just going over the parts that I did in sort of the light to medium brown. And I'm not being too even. I'm leaving a little bit of a streaky texture. You can even look at a piece of parchment paper or just look online and look up aged parchment or something like that, and you can look at the patterns in the paper and the way that different colors play into it. Here, if you want to add maybe some splotchy kind of a copper or a gold color to it, like some of those alternate pencils that I brought out at the beginning, if you want to add a little bit of different color to some of it, now is a good spot to just start streaking in a few different colors. I'm keeping it fairly simple here. I'm just using my darkest brown, and I'm really darkening it in those corners and the edges, using a little bit of hatching texture going both ways, but I'm not being too technical about that. I like just a little bit of texture here, trying to keep it simple, but still something to explore, just some different strokes with your pencil. Then I blended it back in with the warm gray, but you could just take your lightest tan or beige here and sort of start blending in that darkest point into the lighter stuff in the middle. So even just a little bit of blending between the two really starts to bring it together. So yeah, this is where you can see how you can get creative with the subtleties of the neutral colors here. You could use a gray, you could use a warm gray, you could use a yellowish gold, a green gold, a reddish brown. You can add some really cool subtleties. And I think that, again, that helps with the aged look and kind of give it kind of some warmth and maybe some richness to it, even though it's a bit streaky, maybe a little bit haphazard, but it all kind of comes together. And if your style is more neat and tidy and you like a really even blend, of course you can do that too. I tend to prefer a more loose style. I just like to flow that way when I'm doing art. But if you want to blend out your background really, really smooth to a really smooth gradient from dark to light, go for it. You can always use your own creativity in these challenges. So, yeah. Awesome. That's looking great. I'm pretty happy with that. We can always come back to it a little bit, so let's move on to the reds. Now, I also envisioned this in hot pink, and I envisioned it in dark green, so if you don't want to use reds, you can pick a different color, but in my example here, I'm going to use red. And so I have just the brightest red I could find, and then a dark red as well. So just a very, very pretty hard basic stroke, just I'm blending in this border, pretty much full pressure of the pencil, nothing fancy, no shading yet. I'm just coloring it all red. So I mostly wanted to color the character pretty flat with not a lot of shading, but just a little bit of shading to it to add some shadow. So first I'm not doing anything fancy at all. You can just get warmed up with your red pencil here and color the whole border in red, or whatever color you're using. Then I got the darker red, and it's just called dark red, and I just did the outer edge to blend that in a little bit and just give it a little bit of shading. These two colors are really close together, but just adding a second color to the edge of it just adds a tiny bit of depth. Nice. Now onwards to his furry red legs. So my biggest tip for coloring his legs is to, in this part here where they're overlapping, to make sure to keep some contrast in your color. So I'm going to make this bottom leg where it underlaps really dark, and then I'm going to make sure the top one is lighter. This isn't absolute, but just to keep them separate so you can tell that it's two separate legs and they don't kind of blend together. Just to keep them separate, you're going to see that I really darken the bottom one and I leave as much light as I can on the top one. I color it a lot lighter. I don't press as hard with the pencil at the top part where they overlap there. So first I did the light red, and now this is my dark red, and especially around where they underlap there, where the two legs meet, I am darkening that with the dark red just to add a lot of contrast there. And extra points, look up some fur techniques. I'm keeping it very, very simple here. You can just use short, kind of bold strokes in one direction in a couple of different colors to get a fur-like effect. You'll see that more on the top leg, but there are some really technical, interesting ways to do realistic fur. I would suggest, if you're just starting out, just do short strokes in a couple of different colors that are a little bit blotchy, and you can get a pretty good fur technique, which you'll see me do here in a minute. But right here between the two legs, you can see I'm keeping the top one lighter than the bottom, so there's some differentiation. And then at the top of the top leg, I'm darkening it so you have sort of a little bit of contrast in the leg, a little bit of shading, but not too much. Here you can start to see some of the strokey texture, the fur texture come in, just short strokes in the direction that the fur would grow. And then if you use a couple different colors and layer over them, you can get a nice little fur texture going on. So I'm trying to go the direction of the fur here and then leave it a little bit streaky. And then I'm trying to keep that bottom part of it lighter so it contrasts from the bottom leg. These are all just subtleties. You could do them opposite or different or however you see it. Now with the dark red, you can kind of see the fur texture. If you layer in some streaks of the dark red over the lighter bits, you can really see a bit of a fur texture come to life there. And it's pretty simple. There's not much to do other than streaking in some bits of fur in a darker color. But I think that's looking pretty good. Simple enough and gives a nice furry goat texture. Now for his legs, I'm keeping it sort of a billy goat brown and nothing, pretty much almost flat here. I'm leaving some white or a little bit of difference, and then I'm going in and darkening the inner edges there just to give it a little bit of shading, darkening the hoofs. But his body and the brown parts of this are going to be pretty minimal on the shading. I'm keeping it kind of light. Same with his boot here. I'm just darkening in the shadowy parts, the indents, the sole. Tail, pretty much solid. I might go back and add a little shading on the tail there, but it's pretty much just a solid red. It's a small piece. Cool. He's looking rather cute. And then I didn't do much shading at all here on his body. Probably could have used a little more to contrast from the background, but I just wanted to keep it simple. I really wanted the bold red to stand out more than anything else. So I just kind of colored his upper body flat and then added a little bit of the brown shading around the edges and the contours and the shadowy parts, just to give it a little bit of a 3D shape. Under his arm there, under his neck, anywhere you could imagine it being a little bit shadowy. And I'm pressing really, really light here. Of course, if you have an eraser and you think you went too dark, you can lighten it up and then darken it again and go over it as many times as your pencils will allow. Same thing on his face, darkening around his eyes, anything that's sunken in or underlapping under his hairline, in his ear, around his eyes, a little bit on the cheek and chin, under his nose. Darkened those bits, but kept it pretty minimal. Awesome! I hope you had a good time and are feeling the spirit of the Krampus. Cool. So thanks for coloring along, and I'll see you tomorrow for the next bit.